Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast. This one's been recorded. It looks as though we may all be facing a lockdown at the moment. The wind is blowing, the rain is falling. It's that sort of time of year where I kind of consider I should be tying flies, but I just seem to have lost my mojo and I just don't seem to have any interest in it. And I was sort of, having done a podcast not that long ago with Philippa Hake, I contacted her and said, will you tie me some flies? So I bought some flies off her. And I just seem to need to get my mojo back, but I can't seem to find it. I have no interest in doing it. And even in lockdown the first time, I didn't tie one fly. So that's something I've got to work on, because today's the classic sort of day that you probably sit down at the vise, listen to some music or whatever it is and knock out a few flies. But I need to work on that a little bit. So that's going to be my task in the short term. I suspect when I see Philippa's flies, though, I'm probably going to end up just ordering some more. So that's probably going to be the way of things. But today's one's going to be a really interesting one. I know a lot of people who collect fish species, but Kris Kent likes to fish new rivers. Over the years, he's stacked up an impressive number and is always looking to add to it as well. I learned about a few of them, how his life has changed since he became involved in the fishing industry as a job as well. And I'd just like to say as well that I've been fortunate enough to fish with him a number of times, and he's just one of life's good guys, really good company and great to be on the water with. So, Kris, it's great to have you along on the Fly Culture Podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks for the invite, Pete. I'm good, thank you. Apart from this horrible weather, but yeah, no, I'm good.
Good. And are you fishing? Are you getting some fishing done?
A little bit, yeah. We've had sort of conversations in the past about sort of as you get older, and particularly as a sort of pro guide, that sometimes that kind of drive to fish yourself kind of wanes a bit. And I guess this last sort of couple of years, I've been enjoying teaching other people, guiding other people, having the opportunity to take other people out on the river a lot more than necessarily fishing myself. But I did, and you'll be very disappointed to hear that I was trotting, so drowning a maggot, which I know is an anathema to you.
Yeah, but, it's just because I'd be terrible at it. That's the only reason.
Well, we've had a lot of rain the last few weeks, and the river wasn't really quite in fly fishing mood. But I have to say it was very generous with a 3-pound grayling. Which,
wow.
Wow. Which I know a lot of people will say doesn't count on a maggot, but
it's still. I'd take it. I have to admit, I have to. So it's interesting, and I was going to sort of go into your background and stuff, and I wanted to talk a bit about how we met as well. But how have you found that transition from going fishing to taking people fishing? Because some people find it really difficult. My suspicion with yourself is that you probably slipped into that really, really easily. But has that been an interesting change to your approach to fishing? And have you learned a lot as a result of taking people fishing as well?
Yeah. I mean, I've for years really enjoyed taking other people out. As you know, I'm a great donator of auction lots, and I really love hosting other people on those kind of days. But of course, that was always not on a professional basis. It was just something I enjoyed doing. The kind of transition into the fishing industry wasn't, I'll have to admit, necessarily my own choice at the time. It was more of a necessity. But when I went to join Orvis, and then obviously subsequently coming here to Fishing Breaks, that did offer me the opportunity to do a lot more of that at a professional level. And I have to say, I've enjoyed every minute of it. I speak to a lot of people who kind of and ah about, should I take up guiding? And they're worried about, having to deal with kind of difficult people or, awkward situations. And, over the years, I have to say that I think only on one occasion ever had a day when I sort of was not glad that I was a guide and having that opportunity to take people out. And I think it's kind of because it fits in with the thing that's always motivated me, which is helping other people. As you know, I worked in management development for years, helping managers and leaders improve their skills and be better managers. And, that's always been the thing that's kind of floated my boat, is seeing other people go off better able to do whatever it is they want to do, be it, managing other people or be it fishing, and just seeing people improve and get something from that day. That's something that now I get to do, alongside the thing that I, love the most, which is fishing. Maybe it's kind of taken the edge a little bit off my own fishing. Like I say, I don't always feel that motivated to go out and do it because alongside the bit of river keeping I do, I spend, a lot of time in or by a river. And, on your days off, you don't always necessarily want to go and do the same thing again, a bit of a busman's holiday. But, it still gives me that buzz, helping other people, watching other people catch fish, just as much as it does catching fish myself.
That's a really...
I'll ever not fish, but, maybe it's just something that I'll do less alongside the kind of guiding side of things.
That's really interesting. And the reason I said I knew you'd slip seamlessly into it is that for me, a fishing guide has the ability to get on with anyone in any situation, no matter how bad the background might be. You have that ability. And I think that's probably, for me, one of the key things, because in fact, you're actually in the service industry, aren't you? And you're not showing off your angling prowess. It is about getting the most out of those people. But it segues interestingly that you mention working in the Orvis store, and I know it was in the Stockbridge store because I came and saw you a couple of times. And that Stockbridge for me is a kind of, in the UK, about as near to an angling town or a fishing town as you could actually get. It has some of the river running through at the top end and little tributaries and things just by the shop there. What is it like being in a store like that when it's peak season, if it's mayfly? And it must be kind of cool seeing people come in and out and buying flies and talking about the hatches. And how was that?
Well, I always said to the guys I work with that sometimes it's the most frustrating job in the world, because you look out the window, like you say, in Stockbridge, you can almost see the river from the shop. You've got that little carrier just outside the store. The weather's lovely. We used to get mayflies come in the shop that had hatched off the river, so you could almost see what was hatching. There's other people coming in all the time, enthusiastically talking about where they're just about to go off and fish, or where they have just fished, and what a great day they've had. And you're there stuck in the shop all day long. It could, if you were perhaps a weaker man, drive you mad. But then on the other hand, it gives you such a deep insight into what's going on in that fishing world, because, every day, like mayfly peak season, you might see 50 or 60 people during the day, hear 50 or 60 stories about, where they've been, what's been happening. And that's an insight that you wouldn't get if you were just an angler or even a fishing guide, because you're only going to be on one bit of river on a particular day. And you see, every aspect of people's fly fishing lives. You see the highs, the people who come in and they've, had a great catch, a fantastic day. Maybe they've caught a personal best fish, or they've just had a wonderful experience. And of course, you also meet the guys who turn up with their broken rods, the guys who've turned up from London and forgot to put their kit in the boot, or the people who've fallen in and soaked themselves, or just had a dismal day where the hatches never happened and the fish were all sitting on the bottom grumpy. And everything somewhere in between. So it's a wonderful insight into that angling world and the kind of experiences that anglers have. And, a lot of the time you weren't really there to just sell people stuff. It was, partly you're there to give advice and help people and, help them get the best out of the day by giving them the right kit or the right flies. But for a lot of people, I think it was often, what they needed was a bit of therapy, particularly if it was at the kind of bad end of the scale, where they just needed somebody to come in and somebody to, talk to who understood what they were going through. Because, for a lot of us, we go home to the, the girlfriend or the wife, and they don't really care about the fishing and what sort of day you've had. Whereas talking to another fisherman, it's a great opportunity to just, let off a bit of steam and, have somebody kind of listen empathetically to, what an awful time you've had of it. So it does, and it creates wonderful friendships, people that otherwise you wouldn't, meet or know, who, come in the store on a regular basis, share their lives with you. And again, when people are in the shop and they're talking about fishing, they also talk about other things as well. So they talk about, their illnesses and their relationship problems and all those kind of things. So you do really get to, know people really well, and they come in over and over again. So it's a great way of building relationships with people. And I kind of miss not being in the store these days. But on the other hand, I don't miss the frustration of not being able to, go out and cast a line, because the great thing here at Fishing Breaks is we've, the brooks over the road. We've got the lake just outside the office. If you do feel like just casting a line, you can just go and have a fish for half an hour and just, reconnect with that thing that we love so much.
It's interesting you talking about that and seeing the fishing. And I remember it only happened to me, I think, once. There's the occasions where I've come home from guiding and Emma said, "Oh, it feels good for salmon. Do you fancy it?" And of course, I always say yes. But I remember a situation where I worked for Nick and I was guiding someone on the X, and there was a tricky fish. It was in a back eddy across. It was a really hard to control drift you had to get. And I tried really hard with my guests to try and do it. We tried going downstream at it and everything else and all that sort of stuff, and it didn't work. We moved up the river and we caught some more fish, and they went home. And then I got my own rod out and went and caught the fish, or I rose it, I think. I can't remember if I caught it or not, but and that's the one time. And did you find when you were in the store there that you'd think, right, I'm finishing for the day, I'm going to go and have an hour or two on the river? Would that happen?
Yeah, not often enough. You know what it's like, gentlemen of a certain age, Pete, a long day in the shop, you didn't always necessarily have the energy to go off and fish. And you might think, well, it's just working in a shop, it's not very physical, but, you're on your feet all day long. So, but yeah, I mean, there were times when that's what you need. You listen to everybody else talk about it. You sent them all off to their rivers to fish. You can see it all happening outside the shop, and you just need to go off and do what everybody else is doing, even if it's only for a short while. And the great thing about being involved in the industry is that you can always find somewhere to go. And it doesn't have to be a great or grand beat on the river test. For me, living up the Wallop Valley, often it was just half an hour out on the Wallop Brook somewhere, fishing a bit of water that you could jump across in places. But yeah, and it wasn't even about catching fish. It's just that the joy of putting a rod up and casting a line, hopefully at a fish, even if you don't catch it, it still scratches that itch that you've got.
Yeah, that's part of the fun of it, isn't it? And everything that goes along with that as well, which is really, really cool. Well, let's go and have a look at your fishing timeline. And I know you grew up sort of around chalkstream country. Where did your fishing start? And was it the usual course fishing into fly fishing? Where did that begin for you?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in the chalk lands on the Berkshire Downs. I spent a lot of my childhood paddling around in the River Pang, but not really fishing for it. We were at the kind of wrong end of the river. where it was pretty much a winterborn. But as a kid, Dad took me out fishing. We used to go up to the clay pits on the hills around, fishing for tench and carp, and then going down to the Kennet, usually the canal bit, to catch a few, silverfish. And it's interesting how, you have a very close relationship with a river for a long time, which isn't fishing related. And it took me a long time to come back to the Pang and actually finally cast a line on it. In fact, I think it was probably 40 years before I actually got to catch a brown trout on the River Pang. But when it finally happened, it was a great way of kind of closing that circle from my youth.
It's really interesting. The Pang, is that one, you may or may not know this, but I know when I go up to London on the train, it's not that often, but when I go up, I can see the Kennet and I can see all those spots along there. And then there is a spot a little bit further up. Would that be the Pang that you can see from the train there? It looks sort of Streamy-esque.
It might be as you get up sort of Thiel area.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. The Pang does a kind of big U shape. It has a kind of odd course, but it rises up on the chalk downlands over near the sort of A34, and then kind of does a big U-shaped course to join the Thames at Pangbourne. But you sort of Thiel area, you go over it on the M4, and I'm guessing you probably get a glimpse of it from the train line.
Yeah, it is. It's funny that those train journeys, and I'm sure you're the same, and people listening as well, that I stop everything. I know where that section of the Kennet is at Kintbury, and you can see everything, and it's really cool. And I just have to stop. And it's even more exciting every now and again. You see an angler there as well, and that's really cool stuff like that to see. So I always make sure I look out, and I always wondered actually if that was the Pang, and it makes me think. Have you ever come across Peter Anderson? He used to fish it, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, that was his neck of the woods. Yeah. And so what was it like fishing that river that 40 years later? Was that a special moment, catching that first trout on what is in effect your home water, really, I guess? Yeah, I mean, it was. It's this thing that kind of niggles away at you, knowing that there's a river there that and that you could have fished or could be fishing, and for whatever reason you haven't. I mean, if I'd have said to my dad at the time, we'd have probably gone off and poached it somewhere, as he was an inveterate poacher. But we never did. And then over the years, when I came back to sort of fishing and fly fishing, I used to regularly because my parents were still living in that sort of part of the world, come back to that area, visit, sport fish at Thiel, which is, close to the river. And you'd see it, you'd walk past it, you'd get a glimpse of it, and you'd think, oh, that would be a really nice opportunity. But for whatever reason, it sort of never happens. The Pang is actually quite difficult to get onto because there's not a great deal of sort of fishable water, and most of it's sort of tied up in small clubs and syndicates. But again, it was one of those kind of happy accidents. Got to know a guy. He mentioned that he fished on the Pang. I talked about, having sort of grown up by the river, and, that nice incident where he then said, oh, well, you ought to come and fish sometime, without too much, sort of me engineering the situation, thankfully. And we just met up, went along, and had that final opportunity to at last get to fish on the river. And it happened to coincide with a nice mayfly hatch and, accommodating rising fish. And it was just a great day. But also because it was nice to fish there with somebody who intimately knew it. I intimately knew it, but in a much different way and from a much different sort of era. Whereas this guy was a member of the club, he'd been fishing it for a number of years. He loved it. He shared that same sort of wild trout trust ethos that we have. And it was just, great to watch him fish it, listen to him, pick his brains for, the best approach, the best flies, the best places to fish. And in a sense to be guided, because, you end up spending a lot of time helping other people fish, and, sometimes it's nice to actually be on the receiving end of that experience. So, yeah, it was just a great all-round day.
Cool. And so tell me, your path, is it the sort of similar to myself and many others that you started on still waters and then progressed to rivers, or was it a different way that you got into where you are now?
Yeah, it was. I think, like a lot of people, still waters are the place we start because the access is easy. The fishing is. I'm not going to say less difficult, because it is difficult in its own way, but obviously you don't have that added complication of the fact that the water's moving. And in fact, I learned on an estate lake up in North Yorkshire near Wakefield, and a couple of lessons with a guy on the estate lake, picked up the basics of casting, caught a few, stocky rainbows, but quickly realised that wasn't the kind of fishing I was going to enjoy. Wanted something a bit wilder, so went off into the Yorkshire Dales, tracked down some of the big reservoirs, gave that a go. But again, there was something about it. I mean, you were fishing in fabulous places, but something about it didn't quite click. And then I think I can blame Paul Proctor for a lot of things in my life. But, Paul was writing articles for Trout and Salmon back then, wrote about fishing in the Yorkshire Dales, probably on the River Wharf, I'm guessing. And I thought that looks great. So went along, bought a day ticket, didn't really have a clue what I was doing, probably had all the wrong kit and, all the wrong flies, but, went and gave it a go, and it just immediately clicked for me. It was just, what I'd always imagined fly fishing to be. And, since then I can't honestly admit to having, intentionally gone to a still water to fish since. I mean, I do, because that's where we teach and help other people to learn fly fishing. But, I can't honestly say I've got out of bed in the morning and thought, right, I must go to a still water today. Not that there's anything wrong with them, and they serve a great purpose in fly fishing, but it just wasn't where I wanted to be, So I spent, a few years, because I was living up in that neck of the woods, basically fishing as many of the Yorkshire Dales rivers as I could, exploring them, continuing to read Paul's articles, sort of honing my technique until I felt that I was, a reasonably competent river fisherman.
It's really interesting you talk about that moving from still waters to rivers and not looking back. And the word you used there was wilder. And that seems to be a word that seems to be coming back to me from people who are river anglers. And, like you say, that still waters have a really important role to play to anglers who don't fish rivers, and it's a joy watching people on top of their game fish those, and particularly reservoirs as well, where I would be out of my depth on that sort of background, and it's a pleasure to see those sorts of things. I guess that's the thing that makes it all interesting. And I wonder, you said you fished a lot, and I wonder if the river thing comes about because you're like me and many other people, that you fish a lot. And so that variety, and I recorded something recently that, it's never the same, is it? No day is ever the same. And I guess it's to a degree on reservoirs or lakes as well, similar. But do you think that's an aspect of it as well as the connection of standing in the river, wading up the river where that's allowed, obviously, but generally, do you think that's part of it as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's like all things in life. Everybody has different likes and different motivations, and likes to get different things from fishing. They often talk about the sort of ages of anglers, don't they? You start out just wanting to catch a fish. Then you want to catch lots of fish. Then you want to catch big fish, and then you want to catch difficult fish. I think I never really experienced that. I've never been a numbers man. I've never been that worried about catching big fish. Really, what I've just loved is just fishing, but fishing in places that I want to be. And I think some of that goes back to my childhood. I don't know if you knew, but my mother's Norwegian, and when I was a kid, we used to go back to Norway a lot to visit her family, and we would, spend weeks on end in Norway, up in the mountains, just walking the rivers and the hills, spending time in there. They all have little cabins up in the mountains, and that was kind of my growing up, just being in those kind of wild places. And, my homeland in West Berkshire, again, it's, small villages, hamlets, just the downlands, not many people about. So that's where I feel comfortable, and that's where I want to be. We've talked over the years about fishing with other people, and I enjoy that. But, actually what I just really enjoy is being on my own, being somewhere where there aren't other people, and just being able to sort of reconnect with that, that natural world around us, to whatever degree it is natural these days. But, like you say, rivers are endlessly variable. The weather, the conditions, the seasons, the wildlife, the state of the river, its height, its pace, its color. Like you say, there's so many variables that, you could fish the same beat all of your life and you'd never experience the same situation, the same conditions, the same experience. So I think it's that endless variability, and that connection with the river, because like you, I love wading. I'll bank fish if I have to, but I'd much prefer a wading beat. So actually, being in the water, feeling the river around you, pressing against your waders, pushing you, that kind of risk of, particularly if it's a bit up and a bit pacey, the risk of falling in gives it a certain frisson. And just being, connected with that river in a very physical way, and the things around it. We've talked about this before, how often when you're in the river wading, suddenly everything treats you differently. The wildlife seems less concerned about your presence. Animals get up very close to you. Even the fish sometimes will, just come up and sit next to you. You seem to be less of a risk somehow when you're in the river. And therefore you make a much closer connection with not just the river itself, but all of that flora and fauna that surrounds it.
It's really interesting. While you were saying that, I was thinking that the connection thing definitely, and as I alluded to when we started this segment, but you said something really interesting to me that's just made me think, was that you fish the rivers because you can be on your own. And do you think part of our love of fishing rivers, because I always see lakes as a more sociable thing, you walk around and you see people. Do you think people who migrate more so to rivers may also want to be on their own and be alone? And that's a part of it as well. It's just suddenly dawned on me when you said that. Do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, I know a lot of other fishermen, and I think the vast majority of those anglers are people who like to be on their own. Grumpy old men who, eschew the world around them and would rather sort of get away from things. It's a sort of means of escape. And I don't think that's just fly fishing. I think, you look at a lot of the kind of carp anglers, it's a great way of just going off and disconnecting from the rest of the world for a few hours or a few days. There is, of course, that social aspect to fishing. And, I do go fishing with other people. And I think actually I enjoy that more as I'm getting older. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I live alone, and actually going fishing with other people is a way of sort of having a bit of social interaction, especially in these strange COVID days. But yeah, and like you say, I think, particularly the kind of commercial still water world is one where there are going to be other people around. And I'm sure that's why some people like that kind of fishing, because it gives them the opportunity to meet other people, go out with their mates, that kind of thing. But yeah, not for me, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think I've said before that I used to enjoy company more so, and I do enjoy company on the water, but I still can't figure out if that was a function of being a guide, that I was just used to it. And now I'm not doing that I'm enjoying the time more so on my own. And I wonder if I don't know, I haven't figured that out yet, but it's funny, like you say, when you're guiding, you lose a little bit of your time of fishing. Yeah, I feel like I'm getting that back now as well. And that makes me love it even more than I've ever done, and in a different way to which you're experiencing it right now, which is equally as cool as well. But it's in a different way, isn't it? I guess they're all different stages there's no particular order to them. They're just different phases, really, of your fishing career that was still evolving, really, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, we all evolve as people, and through our lives, we want different things from our lives and our friends and our loved ones and the things that we involve ourselves in, and that is naturally going to change through life as you get older, and your social situation changes, your domestic situation changes, and yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, I think it's one of those things that's sort of fundamental in people. When I used to do the leadership training, we used to do a lot on sort of personality types and understanding motivations and those kind of things. And, we would often talk about, introverts and extroverts, and, introverts get energy. They kind of recharge their batteries from being on their own. Whereas extroverts tend to kind of re-energize by being with other people. And I guess I worked out a long time ago that I'm an introvert, and fishing is what recharges my battery. And, I notice it when I've been fishing on my own for a day. I leave the water feeling as though I've got more energy, which seems kind of odd when you've, walked a long way, waded hard, fished hard. You'd think you'd be tired, but actually I come away from the water feeling better about myself. Whereas at the end of the day, fishing with other people or guiding, I do, sit in the car and feel tired. And I think it's the same when I worked in Orvis, spending all day with lots of other people, they kind of suck the energy out of you. So, I guess that's why, you just needed that opportunity to go fishing for a while just to top up the battery a bit.
Yeah, no, I see that. And, from a guiding perspective, it is you may not show it, but it is a pressured job to get people to catch fish as well. And, I always say it's not about that, but ultimately they'll measure success by whether they catch fish or not. And so there is a pressure there. And I know I always used to say to the guys who work with us, back yourself.
Yeah.
And it will happen. Don't worry about it. The more you worry about those things, don't you, the harder those things can be. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. But I wanted to move on a little bit now, because I think we could go down a really interesting wormhole about this. I think it's fascinating. And like you say, the recharging and the mental aspects of it and how that helps. But I was thinking this morning about when we first met. It was on Dartmoor, and it was at a Wild Trout Trust get together. It wasn't the last one. It must be, I can't remember how many years ago. Let's say 5, would it be 6, something like that?
Maybe even 7, yeah. It's been
Wowee. And yeah, that's, time flies, doesn't it? And I remember we met, and you said I take a few pictures and I write a few things, and you were a great supporter of the online magazine Eat Sleep Fish, and you wrote many times for that. You've written for Fly Culture as well. Met you there, and we speak a lot, and you fish with me down here when you're in the area as well, which is really, really cool. And that sort of brings it round to the rivers thing and how that came about. And it said when you said when you were living in Yorkshire that you were fishing rivers there. You were reading Paul's articles and everything else. Did you suddenly, when did that sort of become aware that you were fishing different rivers and that you decided, oh, actually, it might be interesting to see if I can add those because that's been really fun to do, and then broaden and widen your search for rivers? Where did that and how did that really come about?
Well, it's an odd one, isn't it? Because I'm not sure I consciously realised what I was doing until actually very recently. I've been thinking a lot about what people love about fishing and how they like to fish. And I've sort of got this theory that we all, as anglers, sit on a sort of continuum, where at one end you've got the guys who just love to fish one water. And what they love is to really know that water intimately, to fish it a lot, to fish it throughout the season in all its different moods and conditions. And, you know, they if you fish with them, they know where every fish is, that, you know, they've got names, you know, and they know every aspect of that river, and that's what they love. And they're probably a member of a small club or a syndicate. And at the other end of the continuum, you've got people who just love variety and just want to fish lots of different places, maybe for lots of different species. And it's the variety that they love. And they're probably the kind of guys who, you know, do the international trips, and, you know, they probably fish a lot of day ticket water and that kind of thing, because it's the variety that they love. And I guess in hindsight, what I've realised is I'm at that kind of variety end of the scale. I love new waters, but having fished them once or twice, I kind of get a bit bored and, you know, want to go off and try somewhere different. And I guess that's what I've been doing for the last, you know, 25, 30 years, really, is just enjoying the huge variety of fishing that's available, you know, in the UK and also, you know, further afield. I think I only realised that I was consciously doing it 2-3 years ago when I was fishing with our friend Luke Bannister. We were fishing in Cornwall on the Upper Tamar, and we were chatting about all the places with different fish. And Luke recounted this story about how he had fished 99 rivers, and, you know, he was kind of looking for that kind of 100th river to add to his collection. And then he was having a conversation with one of his friends one day, and the guy said, "Oh, do you remember where we fished when we went and fished so-and-so?" And Luke had completely forgotten about this particular river and suddenly realised that he'd already fished 100 rivers. So, and it got me thinking about, well, how many rivers have I fished? And, you know, I'm a little bit anal in terms of record keeping. So I've got a spreadsheet with where I fished recorded on it. So I went back and I totaled them all up. And I think back then it was about 98 rivers or something like that. So I felt like I needed to catch up with Luke. And then I guess from that point on, I sort of realised that actually I had been collecting rivers, even if it wasn't a kind of conscious, purposeful endeavour. But and since then, I guess I have been a bit more active in terms of trying to track down and fish those new rivers, you know, wherever possible. And this year I managed to nudge 120. So, you know, which I think is a fair amount.
And do you have a target in mind that you'd like, or you're just going to keep enjoying it and just seeing what you can find?
I'm not, like I say, what I love is variety. So I'm gonna keep looking for new opportunities. In fact, I was fishing or hosting a guy fishing just recently who's invited me next season to go off and fish a new river. So that's 121. You know, ready. I've got, when I was looking for my 120th, I put an appeal out on social media in case anybody knew of anywhere, and I had a couple of offers. So there's another 2 or 3 opportunities sort of out there that can be sort of fairly easily exploited. Of course, the problem with collecting rivers is that it gets harder. You know, if you collect books, that's easy because people are always writing and publishing new books, but, you know, unfortunately, nobody's making new rivers.
Yeah.
Certainly not in the UK. So, there's a finite amount, and the more of them you fish, the kind of harder it gets.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
anybody out
absolutely.
there knows of any,
Yeah. It's an appeal out there. It was interesting. I was trying to tot up what I'd helped or contributed. There's one river I'm not going to mention that I know you and I fished together, but I think we've done the Bray, the Tor, the Little Dart, the Tone, the X. Was there anywhere else we've done together?
No, I think that sounds like a plus the one you're not going to mention.
Yeah, which was, I remember a lovely picture you took of a grayling, actually, that we caught there as well. So that was really cool to play a very tiny, tiny part in that. And it must be, for me as somebody, I come, as I have said many times, from Essex, and there aren't many trout in Essex. And I think my dream has been to try and catch a trout there. And I guess it's the Cam is where I've got to try and head to do that. Have you fished that river?
No, in fact, East Anglia is a bit of an empty zone for me. I've not had that many opportunities to fish out that way.
I think I've talked with somebody on one of these podcasts. I can't remember off the top of my head now. And they were saying about some of the streams up in that neck of the woods, and there's the Wensum, and then there's these hidden chalk streams that I only hear about. I know it's on the chalk stream film, isn't it? But getting access to those would be kind of interesting. But for me, from Devon to there it's might as well go to Australia, or it's quicker to get to Colorado or somewhere like that. But it's been
the great thing for me was that I, before I joined the sort of fishing world, I had the perfect job for collecting rivers, because it took me all over the country. I was always on the road, traveling, here, there, and everywhere. And, there was always a rod in the back of the car. And, if I had the opportunity, I'd try and find a local river and go off and fish it while I was in that part of the world. Unfortunately, now I don't have that kind of opportunity. So it's not something you kind of accidentally trip across. Now it becomes much more of something that you have to kind of plan and, get other people involved. So it's a little bit not as easy as it used to be, unfortunately.
It reminds me, actually, of the introduction. I said some people collect the numbers of fish species they catch, and I was very fortunate to be in Venezuela a number of years ago and fishing, and we caught some bonefish and some other bits and pieces. I think I shot at top, and I can't remember, some snook. But the highlight for me, and the guy took us out, and it was full albacore. And they were amazing. You had to make a big, long cast, work out where they were going to bust on the bait next, make a cast, rip it, and then hang on if you hooked a fish. And it was just, I came back at the end of the day and said, this was just amazing. And there was somebody there who I know, I'm not going to mention, but he was somebody who liked to collect species numbers. Yeah. And he said, full albacore, I've not caught one. I said, why don't we go out, see if we can go out tomorrow and catch one? And he is super cool, super calm, and we saw these things busting, and his loops usually when they go out over the water are fantastic, the casting's beautiful, and he went completely to pieces. And he said, I'm sorry, and I just sat back and I said, look, I'm going to sit here until you catch a full albacore. Which he did ultimately, and it was a really thrilling moment, but it was obviously quite exciting for him. And he was a little bit nervous about doing it as well, but it was nice to see something ticked off. So that was really cool. But it was interesting. You chatted about having a rod in your car, and knowing you as I do, I can't believe it was a rod. And I remember one of the first times I fished with you that I said, a 7.5 foot rod would be fine. And you opened the back of your car and said, 1, 2, 3, or 4 weight. And you had everyone. And do you want to explain this situation and fine tackle and your love and appreciation of it?
I need therapy. That's what I need. Well, I guess it's a bit like the rivers. What I love is variety, and the same is true when it comes to tackle. I've always tried to kind of post-rationalize why I've got so much kit. My friends refer to my car as the mobile tackle shop, and it's not just rods and reels; it's everything. There's if you need it, it's in the back of my car, and there'll be a spare one just in case. I've tried to post-rationalise it in terms of the fact that I've always been the sort of person who fishes for lots of different species in lots of different places, and one rod, it doesn't fit all. So when I was living in Scotland and fishing, on the locks, you don't want a 7.5 foot rod. You want a nice soft 11 foot lock style rod. But that's no good if you're going to be fishing on the upper air in North Yorkshire. So I've always tried to say that, well, it's because I do so much fishing in so many different places. But that doesn't explain why I've got 7.5 foot rods from 000 to 4 weight, does it? Because, I guess I am just the original tackle tart. And I just get pleasure from having that kind of selection of kit to be able to choose from in any situation. But yeah, it's madness, isn't it? I anticipated you asking the question, so I had a quick check of the spreadsheet this morning, and it is just over 70 rods and just shy of 80 reels, which, and to be fair, that's coarse and fly, and a few tenkara in there as well. But yeah.
Why not?
And you'd think you get to the point where you say, well, I've got enough, but it never happens. Last year I said no more rods, and then I bought a new rod.
And we don't even need to go there, because I know which one it's going to be and which model, so we don't need to go there. What I also, while we're circling around tackle, you're a tool man,
Yeah.
and I'm recovering from, it's taken forever actually, torn rotator cuffs on both. I managed to do them within a year of each other, but I'm convinced part of it is carrying your pack. I think you said, can you pass me your pack? I think I could get into the back of that and you'd carry me around and wouldn't notice it were any heavier. Have you ever weighed it?
No. Perhaps I should. I'll afterwards and report back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been, and if I'm honest, it's not just fishing tackle. It's most things in my life. I've always been a bit of a Boy Scout, and I just have always had the need to be prepared for any situation. And therefore, particularly in fishing, because you never quite know what you're going to encounter, you need a lot of stuff with you, don't you? Just in case. So, I remember Paul Proctor posted something on social media a few years ago about, did he have too many fly boxes? And there was a picture of his bed with, 14 fly boxes on it. And I had to write back and say, no, Paul, you haven't got enough. Because you never know, do you? And I'm sure you've had the same experience. You go out fishing, you've taken a selection of flies with you that you think are going to be appropriate for the day. And then, for whatever reason, you discover that actually what you need is something completely different. Most people wouldn't have it with them, but, when you've got the bottomless backpack, I can guarantee that there'll always be the fly you need somewhere in there. Might take you a while to find it.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of my favourite pastimes is sorting out my fly boxes. And I don't, as you know, probably, I don't carry that many fly boxes with me. And I've got these old boxes full of flies I've tied that have not made the recent cut. And funnily enough, I wonder if part of getting my mojo back is that I strip those flies down and retie them again and make use of it, because there are many that perhaps I could do a little bit more with. So perhaps that might be the thing I need to do. And it's kind of similar to sorting out fly boxes. And as somebody who's everything shambolic, it's kind of interesting that I enjoy sorting out the fly boxes. But it's just, I suppose it's one of those things, isn't it, that when you're not fishing, it's something that keeps you connected to it as well, I guess.
Yeah. It was funny that you said that even during lockdown and everything, you never tied a fly, because the rest of the fly fishing world wasn't it? I mean, all you saw on Facebook during lockdown was pictures of people's flies that they'd tied. But I was the same as you. The Vice never came out once during lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to think why that was the case. And I guess it was kind of admitting defeat, I think. That if you got the Vice out and you started tying flies, that was an admission that you couldn't go fishing. And I know you couldn't go fishing. That was the reality of it. But it was kind of admitting defeat for me. So, I stayed where it was. It didn't come out. But I did exactly like you say. All the fly boxes came out. I had a good sort through. You won't be surprised to know that I've got the active fly boxes and I've got the reserve fly boxes with the top ups and the secondary patterns. And I went through and I remember watching one of those programs about kind of organizing your wardrobe, and it said, well, if you haven't worn it for 2 years, throw it away or send it to the charity shop or something. So I went through all the fly boxes, and anything that I hadn't kind of tied on in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, that went into the retired collection. And then I, made a bit of space to carry some more of the favorite patterns. Mm. When I was introducing people to fly fishing, doing the kind of taster sessions, I always used to say to people that one of the joys of fly fishing is there's so many aspects of it that you can get into. There's the fishing itself, which is fabulous. But you've got the tackle, as you know, one of the bits of it that I enjoy a lot. There's the reading. There's so many books on fly fishing that you can read. I can see on the bookshelves behind you, Pete. There's the fly tying, if you wanted to get into that. There's the entomology. There's so many facets that you can enjoy. And for me, a well-organized fly box is a joy to behold, but it does make me laugh when other people look at them and, sort of draw breath at how tidy and well-organized. And that's my OCD coming out again, I guess.
Yeah. Somebody doesn't have that. I'm just thinking about sorting those out. And I know I was chatting to Philippa yesterday, and I just said, if you find you're tying lots of something that you think's good, just tie me some and I'll buy some of those as well. So, but I'm thinking of this massive pile, and there are hundreds and hundreds of flies. And I'm thinking, wow, there's a lot of tungsten beads in there. I shouldn't just, so perhaps I will do something with it, but I honestly don't know. But I know it's interesting. You mentioned the books behind me. They're Emma's food cookery books. I have 2 bookshelves of fly fishing books here that we're hoping to sort out at some stage. But to me, I say that because food as well is very important to you. And I remember when you were in your other job that you used to always post pictures of meals that you had, good or bad. And often there's a picture of a pork pie and a bottle of beer on a fishing bridge somewhere. That's part of it as well for you, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, you don't get to be 6'5" and 20 stone not enjoying your food. And I was brought up in a household where, food and eating was, an important part of kind of life. You meet these people who just eat for kind of calorific value and seem to get no joy from food. And I've never been able to understand that. Food is something that I get great pleasure from, whether it's reading about it. And you won't be surprised to see here a huge collection of cookbooks. Whether it's reading about it, researching it, looking at ingredients, cooking it, or the best bit, of course, at the end of the day, then eating it. So food's always been an important part of that for me, and therefore something that's kind of gravitated into or transferred into my fishing world as well. And I was endlessly surprised when a mutual friend of ours asked if I would go and do a presentation on to this sort of group of Dorset anglers, and he said, "Well, what would you like to talk about, Kris?" And I said, "Well, it's obvious, isn't it? It's got to be fishing and food." And I thought, nobody else is going to get any interest or pleasure from this presentation, but it went down really well. And then I did another presentation for another group recently, and on a completely different subject. And some of the people who'd been invited rang up and said, is he doing the food presentation? And when they were told no, they said they didn't want to go. my eating habits seem to have become somewhat famous or infamous. I don't know. And Charles Jardine was in the office just recently and bemoaned the fact that I hadn't been posting more pictures of food of late. You always assume that other people just get bored by seeing what you've eaten, but it seems that some people seem to enjoy it. And again, it's interesting how that developed, because I know in my early days of going fishing in North Yorkshire, I would just take it, grab a sandwich on my way to the water. So it was usually, a curled up petrol station sandwich kind of thing. Back in those days, I used to smoke. So smoking was a greater feature of my fishing than the food was. But of course, when you give up smoking, then other things kind of, you need other things to distract you. And for me, it was, I remember vividly, it was a day out with Peter Hayes fishing. And we were on the Nadder at Wilton. And we'd fished hard in the morning, and Peter had caught far more fish than I did, as you would expect. And we retreated to the cars at lunchtime. And I got out my curled up petrol station sandwich, and from the boot of Peter's car emerged a head of endive, some fabulous salami, home cooked bread, and he put together this fabulous little sort of sandwich from all of these wonderful artisan ingredients. And I just sat there feeling completely depressed because I'd been completely outfished and completely out-eaten. And I think from that point onwards, I decided that I needed to raise my food game. Fishing and eating are certainly two things that now are associated with me and an important part of what I do. And, I took this guy out just recently on one of the Wild Trout Trust auction lots. And the bit he was most looking forward to was the sitting on the bridge, drinking the beer and eating the pork pie. So, it's just, like I say, it's anything but a necessity for me. I mean, I do have to eat, but yeah, there's so much joy to be had from enjoying good food with nice people in fabulous surroundings.
Good answer. One of the things I was thinking about while we were talking as well was that we talked about the numbers of fish, numbers of rivers, that you fished. Have you included many that you fished abroad, and have you fished abroad a little bit?
So the 120 is just UK. I haven't included, the international rivers. If you include those, I think it's about 150. But I felt it was sort of more appropriate to kind of focus on the UK rivers. I've certainly enjoyed fishing abroad, but it's, these days it's not something that I have much opportunity to do, or the resources to be able to do. Maybe, at some point again in the future, but. Like a lot of people during COVID, I was chatting with some clients that were learning to fish yesterday. They'd historically always gone abroad on their holidays. This year they couldn't, so they'd hired a camper van, gone off and sort of toured around the south of England, decided they, wanted to learn to fly fish, so came along to the mill here to learn to fly fish. There is so much on our doorstep that we can, enjoy and take advantage of. I guess what I need to do next is work out how many rivers there are, and then see, how much more opportunity there is. I don't know if anybody's ever added up the total number of rivers in the UK, but gut feel, I guess, is that 120 is actually quite a small percentage. So I'm sure there must be lots of opportunity to still go at.
And I guess because you could break that as well, couldn't you, into trout rivers as well that are populated by trout and grayling, or trout and or grayling as well. So it's really, really, really interesting one. Do you have, of the extra 20 rivers from overseas that you fished, do you have a favorite? Which is the one out of those? I know you've experienced a lot and you'd written for Eat Sleep Fish about Eastern Europe as well, but do you have one in particular that stands out for you that you thought, wow, this is the one? I'll give you two. There you go.
I've got to try and narrow it down. I would have to say, and there may be some sort of ancestral bias here, that it's got to be one of the Norwegian rivers, and the one that I always find myself sort of telling other people about most often is the Rainer, and it was a funny river to fish, because we went there, and my compatriots love their trout fishing, and they always get annoyed with me because I seem to always manage to find them a river that's full of grayling. I don't know if there's some bias in there, but we went to the Rainer. First day out, we arrived at the river. It's a typical Norwegian river. It's big, it's wide, it's barreling along, and the hatch was epic. I mean, there were so many fly on the water. We counted 5 different upwing species. There was sedge, there was stonefly, there was all manner of flies on the water, and not a fish rising. And we just couldn't believe it. And we just stood there, watching this river, wondering what was going on. And the hatch built and built and built and built and built. And then all of a sudden, the fish just switched on. There was obviously a point at which they decided there was enough flies to make it worth their while. And all of a sudden, there were just fish rising everywhere. And everybody, was into a fish almost sort of simultaneously. And of course, they were all grayling. And my friends were all swearing at me, Kris has taken us to another bloody grayling river. But they all caught personal best grayling, the river was just full of these big, powerful grayling, and the fishing was awesome. But the funniest thing was that it was only at the end of the week that we finally discovered why we weren't catching any trout, and also why we never saw any other people fishing. And that was because everybody goes out at night there. So all of the trout fishing is done during during the night, and that's when the big trout come out to feed. So, it was just kind of hilarious, really. You need to do your research better, or take a good guide, and then you would know these things.
But it doesn't matter really in some respects, does it? Because it sounds as though you had a fabulous time, and particularly if you're a grayling enthusiast as well.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And grayling on dry flies, great fun as well, isn't it?
Well, and especially there, because it's not those little sipping rises that you get on the chalk streams where the grayling almost sort of tip over backwards to take the dry fly. If you tried to do that in these Norwegian rivers, you'd just get washed away. So these grayling were all porpoising through the surface.
Nice.
You'd see the back come out of the water as they came down onto the fly. So the rise form was just epic, and just seeing these big fish porpoising through the water was just, it really got the heart pumping. But yeah, and when you did latch into one in that fast water, it was, people say that grayling don't fight. Well, they need to go to Norway and catch one of those big Rainer fish, because they, when they turn that big dorsal fin into the current, it's so hard to get them in.
Fantastic. Now, this will be an interesting one. We're going to start winding things down now, but out of those 70 rods, and probably the many thousands you've owned before that as well, what is your Hall of Fame rod? Do you have one that is the one for you?
Well, you offered me 2 rivers, so
2 rods.
So I'll offer you 2 rods. So the first rod that will always have a sort of place in my heart is my first Sage. And that was Charles Jardine's fault. Charles was at the game fair helping out on the Sage stand. I engaged him in conversation and asked him about, what was the best rod to have. He picked up this rod off the rack and took me down to the lake to let me have a cast. And, I just immediately fell in love with that rod. And it's a bit of an odd one because it's certainly not your sort of typical river rod. It's one of the old XPs, a 10-foot 5-weight. So it's not a rod that I get out much these days because it's a bit of a brute. But, in the right circumstances, it was just an epic rod. I remember fishing in New Mexico on the San Juan, drift boat fishing, and it was just the perfect rod for those conditions. And I remember the guide taking the rod and having a go, and he immediately said, "How much would you like for it?" So I think that first Sage, is always a rod I'll remember, and I'll always, hate Charles for introducing me to Sage because that's been an expensive habit. I think taking cocaine would have been cheaper. And then I guess, like a lot of things, it's always going to be the latest rod, isn't it? Because that's the one you've sort of just fallen in love with. And what it is. The one of the first sort of specialist rods that kind of I fell in love with was when I was living in Denmark. I was offered an original Sage LL, the old Lightline series. And it was when I sort of first realized that actually slower rods kind of suit my somewhat relaxed casting style. So when Sage brought out the new generation light lines, I just had to give it a go. And Nick at Farlow's in London, unfortunately, let me try one out. And of course, that was it. Once I tried it, that had to go into the arsenal. So, and very sadly, I broke the tip off it the other day. So,
oh dear, painful.
That was a painful moment. Yeah, but it's an occupational hazard in this job, isn't it? But I mean, 9-foot 4-weight, just for the chalk streams, just the sweetest rod.
Yeah, good choice. Yeah. Good choice. Well, it's been fantastic catching up with you. I was just thinking we've not fished together for a bit, so that's something we need to sort out, isn't it?
Yeah, come the spring, I must arrange a trip down to Cornwall, and we'll get out on the river together.
Fantastic. Well, Kris, thank you for chatting with me. Thank you for being such a great guest, and we've covered so many different and interesting topics that thank you for coming on here and talking with me.
Well, thanks for the invite. Before I let you go, I do have to say how annoyed I am, Pete, at the fact that you've managed to grow a much better trout bum beard than I have. It's just, it's very sad.
Yeah, we can call it the Great British Beard Off, can't we? And I think one of those rare occasions that I've won something. So it's kind of nice. It's out of control. I have no idea what you're supposed to do with them or whatever. So we trim it every now and again, but just let it do its thing, really. It seems to work okay.
It looks great on you, Pete.
Thanks, buddy. And thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to this one as much as me. As ever, we have plenty more planned for you. You may not, or you may know that we also release these on YouTube now. So you can head over to the YouTube channel and watch Kris and I chatting as well. So if you'd like to do that, you can do that too. So lots of options there. But I hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope you're all staying well and safe. And there'll be another Fly Culture podcast very, very soon. Thanks for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.